Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Ask Professor Paranormal. It's the next to last, the penultimate 2024 session or show for this. Of course, we'll be starting up in 2025, as usual. So welcome, everybody. Appreciate you being here. And I know we're going to probably get a few more folks coming in. Definitely thanks for tuning in. And I see some of my regulars. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Susanna. Hi, Paul. Welcome again, as usual. So let's talk about what you want to talk about. I have one question that came in from a viewer from last time who was in England, so really not able to attend these live. I can completely understand that. Hi, Sandra. Uh, and I'm going to address that question in a moment, but I just want to see if there's anything that folks have off the top of their heads, because this time around, I don't have much to go on to speak of. Hi, Angie. Other than to say, I'm hoping everybody's going to have a great holiday season. And I know I'm kind of going to have a couple of weeks off of work, which is going to be nice for a change coming up soon. Just have a little grading still to do for the Ryan class that we had, our ethics class. Hi, James. Good to see folks here. So anybody have anything they want to just pop in there right now? Otherwise, I'll address the question that came in. And that's just a reminder that if something occurs to you between now and the next session of the next show, which will be on December 22nd, please feel free to email me. The email is in the notes for the channel. It's just askprofparanormal@gmail.com, or just simply profparanormal@gmail.com as well. And hi, Tony. Good to see you. Anyway, the question that came in was someone from England, like I mentioned, had asked how the work of Lyle Watson, who wrote a book called Supernature and a kind of subsequent book to that, and also Colin Wilson, who's a very famous name in the philosophy and occult world as well. So actually, I'll get to that question in a moment. I'd rather do some of the questions we have coming up. Does the Blue Lady still visit the Moss Beach Distillery? There are actually still occasional experiences there, according to the employees. She's not as active as she once was, and I have a theory about why that is as well, which I can talk about in a moment. I haven't had a chance to be down there in a couple of years, so I'm hoping to actually get down there over the holidays or right after the holidays, and just kind of check in with the folks I know down there, and also see if I can kind of conjure her up, so to speak. My theory as to why she hasn't been that active there is I think some of you have heard me or read about the fact that there are reports that she's traveled a bit. This goes back to 1991, where a Japanese medium who was with us when we were shooting the first time we did an investigation there, Mrs. Gibo told me the next day that the ghost, that Kate, as we come to know her, actually visited her in her hotel in San Jose. That was a little ways away from the distillery itself. And then there were times that, due to some suggestions that Annette Martin and I had made, she apparently went to Paris. I know I got actually an unsolicited email from a medium in Paris who got a message from this ghost that popped up saying, tell Lloyd in California, parapsychologist in California, that I made it to Paris, kind of related to something that happened during a session we did at the Moss Beach Distillery. She appeared, according to several witnesses, when I was talking about the distillery at a conference in Charlottesville, Virginia, and then at another conference I was talking at about the restaurant as part of my lecture. And after Annette Martin died in 2011, because Annette was the psychic I worked with the most at the distillery. When Annette died, I got a call from a woman up in Canada who I had been speaking to for a few years. She ended up being actually a research subject, a participant at the Ryan Research Center on psychokinesis, because she had apparent psychokinetic abilities. She also had some mediumistic abilities and experiences. She had some experiences in that. And she called me the morning after Annette Martin died. And I have to say that very few people knew Annette Martin had died. She had been diagnosed with cancer earlier in 2011, was cleared by Stanford Medical in July, didn't have cancer anymore. A few weeks later, apparently, because I didn't even know this until her husband called me the night that she died. She went back in because they discovered that the cancer had not gone away, it had come back with a vengeance, and she passed away on a night of September 11th, actually, in 2011. The next morning, this woman, Shirley Black, called me and asked if something had happened to Annette. And I said, "Why do you say that?" And she said, "Well, Kate is here." She had seen Kate. Kate apparently had popped up to Canada a few times during this communications, all the communications I'd had with Shirley up there. And she said, "Annette's here. She looks a lot younger. She's with Kate. Did something happen to Annette?" At which point I said, "Yeah, she passed away." And Annette apparently has been seen at the distillery with Kate, with the Blue Lady. So apparently Annette and Kate are out there kind of having a good time. I don't know if they're seeing the world or what. So they don't really necessarily go to the restaurant that much anymore. That's my understanding. This is my theory about this. I can't, of course, can't prove any of that. Okay, Paul, I'm glad you watched the TV show Ghosts, and Ghost UK is really a good show as well. It'll be interesting to see how the Australian version, how that shapes up, since that's going to be shaping up pretty soon as well. Okay, so let me go back to the question that came in from the guy in England, and that was the work of the writings of Lyle Watson, who wrote about kind of like the psychic life of things. You know, we talk about the Internet of Things, things that have Wi-Fi in them. Well, there's a lot of objects and other things that hold information and may have kind of respond to poltergeist activity, to PK activity. So he wrote a book called Supernature and wrote a follow-up to that as well. And I certainly read Supernature a long time ago. And Colin Wilson, scholar, philosopher, fiction writer, and nonfiction writer, wrote some great books on magic and occult beliefs, on the afterlife and other things. And the answer to the question really was, how is that regarded today in the field of parapsychology? And honestly, it's not regarded as scientific work. There are folks who have talked about it every now and then, but I don't know that anyone goes back to the work of either one of them that much. So it's just something that just a couple of authors that definitely have had an impact on people's experiences. Certainly, I've kind of pulled ideas from both of them early on and kind of ingested them, but they're not really, the writings are not referenced in general for the most part. Okay, Christmas Carol, one of my favorite stories. What do you think of Dickens' Ghosts? Well, Christmas Carol is is not the only ghost story that Charles Dickens wrote. Dickens is regarded as the literary father of the modern ghost story. He wrote other stories, other ghost stories as well, and also wrote some kind of basic detective type stuff. He was one of the early members of the Ghost Club, the London Ghost Club, which still exists in some form today. He and actually Sam Clemens, Mark Twain, were both members of the London Ghost Club at that point. There are ghosts, of course, other ghost stories, and he took literary license with a lot of them based on ghostly stories and legends and things like that. The idea of a ghost with chains, one of the first investigations going back a couple thousand years by Artemidorus in Greece, involved a ghost who was walked around with chains, and Artemidorus was able to figure out who the ghost was, and actually, because of information from the ghosts, according to the story, he was able to find where this unidentified man was buried, and he was buried with chains apparently. So I don't know if Dickens actually knew that story, or if that just simply was the rattling chains came from some other legends in England at that point. But of course, there are many literary portrayals of ghosts that don't necessarily reflect reality in various ways. I think that Marley's ghost in A Christmas Carol probably is closer, because Marley was a real person, whereas the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future, he was telling a story. Those are not necessarily actual beings at all for that. Do you have any experience and advice in running a rescue circle? I assume you mean a rescue circle of spirits. And I have to say, it depends on whether that spirit needs rescuing. Don't run a rescue circle. I've never been involved in a circle that way. But this is something that I feel very strongly about. I know Annette Martin and other mediums and psychics I've worked with also feel very strongly about this. And we've had clashes of ideas with some other psychics and mediums over the years. And that is that when an apparition, a ghost, a conscious entity is detected, experienced, number one, there's an awful lot of fear that comes in the reaction of the living people that is unwarranted if they would just get away from the pop culture ideas of ghosts being dangerous. And the idea that we're going in to get rid of the ghost, to push them to the light, which is what a lot of the times the rescue folks do, that doesn't work for me. If we're going in to do an investigation, if we're going in to help people, we're not only, and I know that the rescue thing is the intention is to help them cross over, but there's an assumption there, and the assumption is that they're meant to cross over, number one, and number two, that they want to cross over. We've had over the years encounters with a couple of situations where people had called in a local person to help to communicate with the ghost. They weren't afraid, and the next thing they know, the rescue mediums are pushing the ghost to the light and moving the ghost on. When in fact, what the witnesses had said was, we were perfectly happy with having her here or him here, and the communication indicated that they didn't want to go yet. So I think it's unethical. They're still human beings. They should still have free will. I think that if they want to move on, they should. I think it's appropriate to figure out a way to move them out of the house if they're bothering the people in the house. They can go anywhere once they figure it out. We can help them figure that out. We have occasions where the apparition is communicating that they didn't see the light. In some respects, the light is kind of folklore. So we will help them by information on how to let go of being here and moving on to the next stage, whatever that might be. But the idea of purposely going in to every case to move that spirit on to whatever the next level of existence, when there might actually be a karmic reason, a spiritual reason that the person didn't move on to begin with. I think that's, or that the person doesn't want to, they're not done yet with whatever it is they're here for. I think that's not appropriate. You're violating their free will. Again, you have to, if they're bothering the people in the home, that's a different story. You move them out of the house, but you don't necessarily have to move them on after that. So that's my 2 cents on that piece there. Communication is the key. Talking to them, finding out who they are, why they're here, and they may not know why they're still there, in which case that you can ask them if they want to move on, and you do that. But there are a number of pieces there. Sandra, any news on sequels of After Death, Near Death and Afterlife? I believe I'm having a meeting with my co-authors this week. I'm hoping to have a meeting this week to find out where we are in the process. Rich Hosek is our main author. So once we get material from him, then Arnold and I both do a pass on it. I also then write some nonfiction stuff at the very end, afterwards. I'm hoping to have something at the very beginning of the year for that. I'm hoping we get something soon, because you're not the only one who's been asking. I get regular questions from a few people in general. Sam Parnia just released a new video on YouTube channel. He talks about how he researches NDEs. Thank you for that, Paul. Recommend that to everybody. Parnia's work with near-death experiences, very important. So absolutely take a look at that video. Neighbor just passed Thursday morning. Her son had passed a number of years ago. She had difficulty with her. On Kasha's book, Crossing a Sea of Stars, it's on Kasha Amenti. I think it's actually been pulled from Amazon right now. I think she's doing another pass on the book. That was about her experience with her daughter committing suicide, on Kasha being a medium, a good friend of mine. So if you can find that book, then I highly recommend it. It is very helpful for how somebody can connect and deal with death in that way. Also, there is a set of grief cards that was created by Julie Beischel of the Windbridge Institute. Windbridge Research Center. She does exceptional research with spirit mediums and on the afterlife in general. That's a really good book to work with. And the other, I'll just pull out, is connected to the Forever Family Foundation. It's a book called Love Knows No Death. It's a workbook. You can find that on Amazon. It's by Piero Calvi Paracetti. But if you just look up Love Knows No Death, it is a workbook for someone to work through their grief. It has links in it as you work through it to videos and other material downloads that one can do. People who have used it have found it incredibly helpful. So if you know someone in grief, that's a really good resource also as well. Okay, Kathy, you're in Cape Cod. Hope you're having a good time. One local person telling you a story about a widow's walk. Are there any ghost stories of a widow's walk? So I guess do you mean a widow's walk on a house, which is kind of outside the house in some respect, or something else? Because I know that there's other applications that as well. Of course, I've heard stories of widows' walks on the house seeing an apparition walking around that way as well. Angie. So Angie works at the Rhine Research Center. We had a call to the office from a family that was grateful to receive info on how to coexist and communicate with the ghosts. They were so appreciative. Communication is the key. Once and actually the process of communication, the starting of the communication, people ask me, what do I do if I have a ghost? I said, well, ask them who he or she is. Who are they? What do they want? Why are they here? So that's pretty much why are they here. And the other thing is a simple question. What can we do for you? Interestingly enough, well, two things happen. One, a lot of people are really hesitant to start a conversation with a ghost. They're afraid because of all the pop culture stuff. And usually the response is, what if we get an answer? I said, well, then you'll have answers. We'll know who the ghost is and what's going on, and maybe even what the ghost needs. Maybe the ghost does need rescue to be pushed to the other side. Maybe there's something else that they need. All right, because there's a lot of reasons that can happen. But the communication process is absolutely key. And the witnesses who are already experiencing the apparition, you don't need a medium or psychic to come in if you've got witnesses who are already experiencing that apparition, who are willing to attempt the conversation process, the communication process. It's helpful. It's the way to go. And honestly, what it does also is puts some of the power back into the people themselves, the living clients themselves. And that's an important part of any really good investigation, is to empower the people who are living in that situation. Usually one of the things we do is we involve them in the investigation, not just interview them, might actually ask them to do things in the investigation. If there's any need for historical research or checking who used to be living there, I like to have the people living in that house doing it, the clients actually doing all that research, for a number of reasons, one of which is if there's any money to spend, they have to spend it. That's one thing, but that's practical. The reality is, by making them part of the investigation, especially if they can do a little detection themselves or communication themselves, you're empowering them in the situation that might be causing them fear. So that's always a really great thing to do. Mary Prankster, I think that Marley's idea of change represents the ties to material goods. Yeah, I think that makes really good sense. And, really don't get a lot of reports at all of ghosts wearing chains. It might, again, tie back to if they were chained up or tied up and buried that way or killed that way. But very difficult. Yeah, unfortunately, I'll check on Ankasha's book. I'll have to check with her. It's time for me to check in with her and see what's happening with the book at this point. All right. Women looking for sailors. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, the widow's walk thing. That may be a bit of folklore tied over from the Greek sirens looking for sailors. There's a lot of really interesting nautical legends, stories There are a lot of stories of haunted ships. There are a lot of stories about, of course, the ghost ship, the Flying Dutchman, or other ships that appear that have been seen. And even to this day, of course, we have the USS Hornet Aircraft Carrier Museum, which has got a lot of ghosts there here in the Bay Area. But the U.S. Navy, in their blue and gray journal, over the years have put in stories, articles about. So this is official. Articles about ghosts seen on Navy ships in service, for that matter. So I think that goes back to the idea that we have an awful lot of sailor, kind of like nautical stories, not only about sea serpents and sea monsters and things like that, but generally about spirits. Of course, that led to things like Pirates of the Caribbean and that whole storyline of the first movie as well. Okay, Ian, last time you mentioned orbs. Wonder what you thought are what they may be. Photographic errors. That's what they are, for the most part. The story of orbs started actually in the mid-1990s with something that was noted by a ghost hunter named Dave Oster, who eventually he and his partner Sharon Gill started the International Ghost Hunter Society, which was on the web, on the internet. It wasn't even the web at that point, but they eventually they had thousands of people paying them to be members, to put their photos into the library, and only members could access the greater library of all these the orb photos and ghost photos. And on a local ABC program, when he was interviewed, and he kept repeating this through the 90s, as he said on ABC TV, orbs in these photos, orbs are spirits. That's what he said. Now, in the early 90s, something else happened. What happened was flashes on cameras. The instant cameras and other cameras got more powerful. That meant that the flash reached further out and could reflect back from much further objects that were semi-reflective or reflective. Basic digital cameras had issues, and there are issues about the focal length, where the powerful flash coming back, hitting dust close to the lens, causes an orb process. So Fujifilm, even in the late 90s, had a page up on their website explaining it. There are a couple of great sites that explain the creation of orbs and the rods and all this other stuff, especially, and even on infrared is another problem, because it doesn't really give you a clear picture of things that are floating around, dust and other things like that. Saying that because you had an orb on a photograph taken in a haunted place makes that a spirit is an illogical connection. There's no logic behind that. There are other things that's going to exist in every haunted place, but the fact is that you could take those pictures almost anywhere, and suddenly now you're getting orbs everywhere. Does that mean there are spirits everywhere? And that's what people started saying, that there were spirits everywhere. So the majority of those are not spirits at all. Thank you, Graveyard Grog. It's not only reflection, it's particulate, it's refraction. If you have a long lens on the camera, the odds are you're not going to get orbs. Although I did speak to a professional photographer in the early 2000s at an event who knew nothing about orbs. I mean, we just started talking. He was a photographer, also freelance from Newsweek, and he had a $10,000 Nikon camera, like incredible. Every once in a while, he told me, he had to research this with Nikon, he'd get an orb on a picture. And it turned out that the digital processing, pixels are these little squares, but the processing turns it into a round, glowing shape. So when he would get orbs with the kind of camera and photography he's using, Nikon identified those as pixel dropouts, and the algorithm turned them into orbs. So photographic. There is a natural phenomenon, however, called earthlights or ball lightning. These are static fields. They're kind of plasma effects, most often caused by certain types of quartz crystals in the soil, but there's other reasons why they may appear. And those can be photographed. Those actually can be seen with the naked eye, whereas orbs cannot be seen with the naked eye. And as one of my colleagues pointed out when he looked at a bunch of orb pictures years ago, they're flat. If you take a picture of a baseball or a crystal ball or a snow globe, you can tell it was a three-dimensional object. Orbs look flat. They look two-dimensional. So unless you're taking pictures of two-dimensional beings that are peeking into our dimension, it doesn't make any sense that these are spirits at all. They also are taken anywhere, and there's so many reasons why that they're not what they are. All right, so let me go back up here, and now that I've had my diatribe, orbs are like the four-letter word that I hate to hear. Is, let's see, Susanna, let's see, talking about the Widow's Walk. Thank you, Susanna. Is it true that more ghostly activity during the Christmas holiday season? I've not heard that, but it would make sense that people would have, for a couple of reasons, a couple of things. First of all, people are around their house much more than during the holiday season than they might actually be at other times of the year. There were a lot more reports during the lockdown for COVID that had nothing to do with the paranormal, but they were reported paranormal occurrences because people had not been in their homes 24 hours a day for weeks on end, and they had not noticed things about their homes. That's possible. I think sentimentality can also cause people to remember those they have lost, and that might create something for them. Let's see. Yeah. Let me go past the haunted mansion discussion there. I actually did pick up a thermal imager. I just picked up an attachment for my phone, a FLIR camera. And I want to mention something about the FLIR cameras also, which is really interesting. We were actually, my group, along with some folks from Florida, in an investigation we did in Florida in '93, because at the time, thermal vision cameras, the Agema company was the main game in town. The company was eventually bought by FLIR. And you had a case that had the cooling system for this camera, this thermal camera. And we were really not looking for hotspots. We were actually looking for anything that might indicate a change in temperature. We even had that the second night in this house, was again with this Japanese medium, Mrs. Gibo, where the temperature in the one room that was supposedly the most active, as Mrs. Gibo was having a conversation with the ghost, we didn't get anything on camera with the ghost, the thermal vision with the ghost. But we did see the temperature in that room drop from the ambient temperature in July in Central Florida with no air conditioning from 97 degrees to 75. You could tell that by looking at the walls with thermal vision. Thermal vision only works on surfaces. That's important to know. However, the night before, when we were, actually, Mrs. Gibo was having a conversation with this little girl's ghost, we had a wide range of environmental sensing equipment, and every piece of equipment other than the thermometer, the temperature wasn't changing, but everything was going off. I mean, everything was going nuts. In fact, we had a geomagnetic sensing station, and that actually also registered some really bizarre activity. And on the thermal vision, we got some floating heat spots, heat fogs that the Agema company, when they saw the video and we gave them all the data, they could not explain. So I don't know, that could not be possible in the normal operation of a thermal vision, but like the possibility for actual ghost photos, there is nothing optical about a ghost. There's nothing ghosts don't give off heat. This whole idea of ghosts needing to create cold spots is not true. And in fact, in that one house where the temperature dropped in the one room from 97 to 75, you can call that a cool spot. The room next to that, the couple's bedroom, went up to 110 degrees. So it wasn't that the temperature was used by the ghost. It was moved because apparently Mrs. Gibo said she was hot and the ghost was trying to help with that. So there's a lot of factors that we have to look at here. I bought the thermal scanner because it's really interesting to see if there are temperature changes. You can tell that with surfaces very easily with the thermal scanner. And sometimes there are unexplained bits of that too. That's happened to us at the Moss Beach Distillery. With the surfaces change when there's no reason for that to actually happen. That's also an interesting thing. But a couple things that are important about thermal scanners. Number one, somebody leans up against a wall or puts their hand on the wall, and because we are warmer often than the ambient temperature, especially if the room is cold, it leaves something. One TV show, stupidly or on purpose really, showed a handprint on a wall during an investigation done by somebody I know. They were using thermal vision. Also showed footprints. Okay, so the interesting thing was, and what my colleague told me was, he was leaning up against the wall and he tried to tell them when they were getting all excited about the thermal vision of the hand, he told them it was him. His hand was on the wall and changed the temperature in that form. So it was kind of an infrared echo. And it turned out that the footprints were caused by the cameraman who was walking backwards. Oh, and you would actually see the footsteps going backwards as well. Again, his feet were, even the soles of his shoes were warmer because they had just been in a warm environment. The other thing I discovered right off the bat with the FLIR attachment here in my home office was, in fact, I'll just move my head for a minute. You can see that there's a picture back there that's reflecting the ring light. And when I aimed the FLIR, and the camera at just kind of moving it around the room and aiming it at the wall, I saw a figure. There was actually a figure, slight figure, that was present and turned out to be right at where that glass was. And it was moving like me. I waved my hand and the figure moved my hand, moved the hand. So it will pick up even a slight change when there is a reflection, which means that some of the thermal vision stuff I've seen was very suspect. Now I know exactly why it's suspect, because they were seeing a figure in the window, and it was probably the person using the camera or someone else walking by. So you got to be careful about stuff like that. Susanna, remember the women in Olympia, Washington, who had pictures of orbs they thought were their father, but they would not give it the photos for examination. Yeah, that happens a lot, unfortunately. Let's see here. They might have just had a dusty house. By the way, at the Moss Beach Distillery, we got a great picture by a couple of women who were working with me, a couple of my students in a local class. They were both ex-Navy, by the way. They had been retired, and they were working on trying to get ghost photos. And we were outside one evening, and they took this one great picture with Polaroid, which rarely ever gets orbs because you'd have to directly face something reflective. But they knew what it was right away. They showed it to me. But there was a mist. In other words, there was moisture in the air. And the flash, which is not a very powerful one in a Polaroid camera, reflected off the water droplets near the camera, causing all these beautiful orbs. So, you have to be really careful and analyze what's actually going on as well. Paul, you watched a video with skeptic Chris French talking about parapsychology. He seems somewhat open-minded, like Michael Shermer. It's taken a while for Chris French to admit that parapsychology is doing something scientific, even though he doesn't agree that ESP exists. It's taken a while. I guess a lot of people in the UK world of parapsychology know him and probably were able to finally convince him. It's a tough thing, though. He's a little bit more open-minded, but he still is the not so believing or not so accepting skeptic of the phenomena itself. But at least he's actually looking at parapsychology as a science now, which is really important for us. Kathy, have you heard of the car-sized drones over New Jersey? 800 number for the FBI. Yeah, I did. I saw a headline about this earlier this week. I hadn't really looked into it. It's stopping car clocks when it hovers. Just car clocks? That's unusual. I can see, you know, one of the things that's really interesting about UFO reports going back, and again, I'm not a UFO guy, but I do remember some of the stuff when I was looking into UFOs in college, that some of the reports were that cars would stop working when the UFO was kind of like passing over. And interestingly enough, when I worked with Martin Caden, the science and science fiction writer, who also could do PK back in the 90s, he had looked into the whole phenomenon. He actually had gathered a lot of information about ball lightning, earth lights, and that some of them are not round. You know, we talk about ball lightning. Some of them actually are, that he found reports of them were ovoid, so ovals, saucer shaped kind of thing. Sometimes they were fairly large. They would often follow power lines, and if they touched or came near a car, it was like a temporary electromagnetic field, electromagnetic pulse. So it would stop a car. So those things can do that too. But the drones are pretty physical from what I understand. And I just have to, I know the FBI has taken reports on this. It's really curious as to what's going on and whether somebody's testing something. Let's see here. Angie, people having epileptic seizures or about to have them can see hallucinations like orbs, seizure auras. That is absolutely true. And of course, we also have somewhat of a connection between some poltergeist agents and epileptic seizures or epileptiform activity in the brain, which is pretty interesting as well. That's some of the research that Bill Roll and Jerry Solfin did years ago. Yeah, and Graveyard Grog is mentioning where I was on the. We did that right before the show a couple of weeks ago with a mirror. He did one with a mirror. I did just with the reflective glass. So you know, there's nothing that detects ghosts. We can't say that a single photograph is absolutely of a ghost. We need backup for all of this stuff. In other words, just like people won't accept the testimony of one person who sees a ghost, if two people saw the ghost or three people saw the ghost, or there was some other indication, something else that was going on, that's more acceptable. It's better evidence. The same thing with a photo, especially when no one, the thing about orb pictures and some of these other pictures were taken in places that nobody had ever seen it or had a psychic experience. Nothing paranormal had ever occurred. And no one was having an experience. So how do you know it was a ghost? It's not something you can pick up. Have I seen Penn and Teller's show called BS? I watched a couple of them. You know, Penn Jillette is a, how do I put this? He's a pseudo skeptic. He is a true disbeliever, and he's very arrogant about it. We see a lot of the true disbelievers are very arrogant, obnoxious, and even aggressive. And he's definitely been aggressive in the past about the subject. I don't pay any attention. You know, it is true. You can fake psychic stuff. You can fake paranormal experiences. People do make mistakes. That's why we look into them carefully. But most of those folks, probably Penn Jillette, and I don't know about Teller, you know, because he doesn't say much, but the pseudo skeptics will not look at the actual laboratory research. They will not look at the research that's been gathered on survival of bodily death. They will not look at the methodologies of spirit mediums, that is the research that's being done these days. They just make an assumption and a statement that it's impossible, it'll violate the laws of physics, whatever psychic thing it is, it violates the laws of physics. Therefore, why would they bother even looking at the research? And that's not scientific, actually. The reason they should look at the research is because people are having these experiences. And if nobody looks at the research, if nobody tries to research what's behind the experiences, all you have are assumptions. That's it. Let's see here. Physical mediumship, mainly trumpets. We recently sat in a circle and they were moving in the room. Easy to fake as it was in the dark. Yeah, you know, unfortunately in the dark, a lot of stuff can be done very easily. It just kind of is crazy to me that mediums, physical mediums, this is not the case with mental mediums or psychic mediums the evidential mediums. Physical mediums must have total darkness, and they refuse to do infrared and to allow night shot at the very least. And frankly, that's ridiculous. The claim is that the infrared spot will bother the spirits, and yet the spirits will do their thing with a red light bulb going, and that red light bulb, because it's almost never an LED, that red light bulb is hot. That puts out more infrared than the night shot camera spot. It's just, and it doesn't matter how often you explain that to them, they still are insistent that you can't do that. And that makes me suspicious, totally suspicious. Still befuddles me that these agencies aren't watching these drones and see where they go when the sun comes up. Yeah, or why somebody hasn't tried to shoot one down. I don't want to suggest that the average citizen do that, but you would think that somebody in law enforcement would try to do that. One commentator said, yeah, they can't stay up forever. Track them where they come down. Absolutely. The question is also if they're below the level of typical radar, that might make it a little difficult to track them, but there are ways that can be done for that. Yeah, Penn seems like an arrogant pseudo-skeptic. Gary Schwartz actually has a story about being on a TV show with Penn and actually being threatened. Now, when Gary said threatened, Penn is a really big guy, and he was practically yelling at Gary and looming over him. Not that he threatened to hit Gary or do anything like that, but Gary felt a threatening presence. Again, Penn's much bigger than Gary Schwartz, so that's always tough. Outside of the U.S., which country is the most interesting for paranormal activity? I had a choice of 3 countries to investigate. Well, one place I would, love to go to, not for activity, but for not activity per se, but I would love to go to Brazil and spend some time down there, because the idea of, a good portion of the country, this is the most populous Catholic country in the world. It also has a tradition of something called Spiritism. It's a spiritualist form created by Allan Kardec many, many decades ago. There are a lot of mediums, physical and mental, mostly mental mediums. In fact, it's a normal thing for a lot of people. And the Catholic Church has left people alone down there about this. They don't want to alienate the most populous Catholic country in the world. There are a lot of traditions from West Africa as well that are incorporated. And so there's some pretty phenomenal stuff on the healing level, psychic surgery level, physical and mental mediumship down there. That would be one place I'd want to go to. I don't know if it's, to me, that's very interesting. Guy Lyon Playfair wrote a book about it years ago. and we have a couple of centers of parapsychological research down there as well. There's a number of parapsychologists who are Brazilian and operating in Brazil. Another place I'd love to go, is just is Great Britain. So I think that just the history of some of the hauntings and stories of British tradition and Scottish tradition, maybe Ireland also at that point. So all of those are really kind of interesting to me. But there are so many other places. I mean, there are places in China. There is Japan. I've been to Japan, but actually to talk to folks who had near-death experiences years ago, kind of love to do a little bit more on the ghostly front down there as well. And I will also mention that while not high on the paranormal activity list in terms of countries, I've been to Tahiti a few times, French Polynesia, and the last time I was there, we were on a boat, a very small cruise ship that went around the islands. And on Raiatea, went on a kind of folklore tour, talking about supernatural folklore, and it was led by an anthropologist who I got to know a little bit. And the anthropologist was originally from Hawaii, and he was talking about his next door neighbor being a witch doctor and talking about people having telepathic experiences. And then I mentioned I was a parapsychologist, and we kind of really talked quite a bit. So I'd love to go back there and look into things. Let's see. Surviving Death. I will say that the documentary series Surviving Death on Netflix was very good. There were some things that the producers did in not portraying things as accurately as they could have. The episode I was in, which is episode 5, Mariah Kunau, who is shown as a ghost hunter using some equipment, actually is a medium. And she had, while she was at the location, she had a number of different experiences, and that was completely cut out of the show. So that was one thing that was a shame. They also played a little bit with some audio, some EVP there, which really wasn't accurate, but got the gist of it anyway. Let's see. In Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, there's an episode of Unsolved Mysteries involved a house on that street, Ann Street. A lot of places like that. There was a reason they aren't in Kentucky. I'm not sure who they is. Ms. Niz there. Read Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent. Good read on UAPs. Again, that's a topic that I don't really deal much with at all these days. Ian, one of these days I'll make it over there. Just have to figure out the best way to do that. I do want to meet my counterparts at the SPR. I have some colleagues that I know somewhat over there. Cal Cooper at University of Northampton, for example. And I'd love to get up to Edinburgh, to see Edinburgh Castle for a number of reasons. I should lead a tour to Scotland. Maybe one day I will. That's not a bad idea, Mariah. I have a lot of contacts in Edinburgh, actually, because the Kessler unit of parapsychology is at the University of Edinburgh. And I know a number of the guys who are in the Psychic Entertainers Association, or used to be. Some of them are no longer in the organization, but I know them, and they do a lot of things up there too. So might be kind of fun. I'm trying to think if I'm doing a podcast interview. It's going to be pre-recorded on Friday, a week from Friday, actually. Yeah, it's a week from Friday, on the 20th. And I think it'll show up early in 2025. There's a couple others that I already recorded, and they haven't been up there yet. I'm going to have a brand new website. Just trying to decide which of the domains I own. It's probably going to be under Lloyd Auerbach. It's going to probably be www.lloydauerbach.com, but it might be something else. I'll announce that at our next session, because it'll be up and running by then. And I'm going to start. I haven't been doing blogs. I haven't been doing a lot of other stuff, so I'm going to be doing that. And I'll also have a media page where I'll start listing all the podcasts as they come through, the links to those podcasts. So that's coming up real soon. Haven't had a website in quite a while, and working. This is going to be an author-based website, so I still may have another website coming a few months later as well. All right, that was a nice run of questions. Ms. Niz, if you want to kind of comment on Kentucky there, I'm happy to see what that is. Does that have to do with the drones or Unsolved Mysteries or something else? I know Tennessee's got some stuff. I haven't been to Kentucky. I'm trying to remember if I've ever lectured at a college in Kentucky. I've been to Knoxville and a couple other colleges in Tennessee, and there's definitely some ghostly stuff going on down there. Have I witnessed anyone do photography? All right, so for those who don't know Ted Sirios's name, he was a bellhop. This is back in the 1960s. Jewel Eisenbud, psychiatrist and parapsychologist, was approached by Ted Sirios. He claimed he was able to affect film in cameras or otherwise. And Eisenbud set up testing protocols. And while there's some question about a few things, it looks like Ted Sirios's PK ability, that he has psychokinetic ability to affect film and cause images to appear on Polaroid and other film as well. Uri Geller ostensibly was able to blank film, expose film that was unexposed. still in the role. Also was able to, there were instances of him reportedly affecting videotape and blanking videotape, that like erasing it. Maybe he did have a big tape degausser on him at the time. Don't know. There are other people who have affected or influenced film. There was a woman who contacted us way back in the 80s at JFK University's parapsychology program. I never was able to go much further with her. Really wish I could. But she was sending Polaroids, copies of Polaroids. She went to the big celebrity cemetery. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. Johnny Carson used to talk about it all the time. In Forest Lawn, I think it was, near Hollywood. And she was taking pictures of like Marilyn Monroe's tombstone. She took a picture of Walt Disney, of one of the Disney family. She took a picture of I think it was Walt Disney's picture, but it might not have been Disney himself. I'm trying to remember if he was alive still at the time. But sitting on top of the tombstone was kind of a figure that looked vaguely like Mickey Mouse. And there were other figures when she would take pictures of these tombstones that seemed to relate to who this was. And there's no reason in the world that there was a spirit of the person who was buried there that was showing up that day to affect the camera. She didn't see anything. She was just taking pictures, and she discovered these images there. I don't know if she was faking it or not. With a Polaroid, it would have been, at the time, the way these pictures showed up, it would have been very difficult to fake them. But I always thought that she was causing these things to happen. This was a bit of thoughtography in general. So a friend of mine is doing a lot of research on Ted Sirios and on Eisenbud's work. And one of the interesting things about Sirios is he would drink heavily before he would do the thoughtography. It was a state-specific thing, and he was an alcoholic. So that in itself was pretty interesting. Okay, general thoughts on REM pods. REM pods are $20, probably a little bit more than that now, theremin kits. Theremin is a musical instrument that reacts to electromagnetism, put in a casing with lights. That's what a REM pod is. The casing itself probably costs significantly more to manufacture than the theremin kits, because you could probably buy the theremin kits. When I say $20 or $25, that's what they are on Amazon to build one. You could wholesale that, but they sell those for hundreds of dollars, closer to $200 or sometimes more. There's nothing, I would say get yourself a theremin, spend $100 on a theremin, because then you can learn to play a musical instrument too. And it's going to be a lot more accurate, asking a spirit to try to move closer to it and interact with it. I'd say that REM pods are not that useful at all. And the claims of REM pods are ridiculous based on what I just said. So that's an important thing. ITC, instrumental trance communication. That usually refers, instead of EVP, which is voice, that usually refers to video, to imagery on video. The early ITC stuff, I'm very skeptical of for a number of reasons. The early ITC was done by having a camera connected to a TV set, and the antenna, there was no cable attached. It was not attached to a rooftop antenna, and they would often pull the antenna off the actual TV set. And by aiming the camera and connecting it to the TV set, you're getting a feedback loop, which kind of causes static and snow. And occasionally in the static and snow, and when we were recording it, you would actually see faces or figures. The problem with that, my dad worked for NBC. My dad worked for NBC back in the 50s, actually. So when I had a TV set in my room when I was about 2 or 3 years old, which my dad told me he bought at the RCA family store for $25 because it was cheap at that point. We were the family that had the first color TV set on the block, again, because my dad got it at the RCA family store. RCA at the time owned NBC. And back then you would have a TV repairman come and fix the console TV sets when a tube blew out. I spent a lot of time talking to Bill, the TV repair guy, And in fact, when I had a portable black and white TV set in college, I was able to fix it myself by going out and buying the right tubes from Radio Shack. So I learned quite a bit. And one of the things I learned, and my dad actually taught me when we talked about the ITC thing, when I showed it to him years ago, was the TVs, even if you take the antenna out and disable it, there's a receiver that can still pick up signals. And so even in that snow, you could actually get basically get a TV broadcast that would interfere and be picked up in little bits and pieces and could cause faces and images, figures moving around, and other things. So I know it's not done the same way today, but the early work is unfortunately not suspect specifically, but honestly, unless the research reports actually state that they removed the receiver, which I don't believe they could because they had to connect the camera to something, it's contaminated. So I'm not sure about the ITC stuff in general at this point. And the fact is that for the same reason we have to be critical of EVP from a parapsychological perspective, it may not be spirits affecting the medium, the video, the audio. It could be the operator. It could be the unconscious psychokinesis of the operator, not something to do with spirits. It also could be a combination effect that a spirit is working through the operator as well. So, yeah, Mickey Mouse wasn't dead at the time, but he's a thought form in that sense. All right, let's see here. Spirit trumpets. All it is it's like a cheap megaphone, basically. It's a tube that starts out with a small you could actually talk through it, and it kind of comes out to a wider opening. It's called a trumpet because technically it's like the trumpets that they would play in movies and TV shows of the medieval times when they're announcing the arrival of a king. You got this long trumpety thing, and they can create sound from that. The spiritualists use those things to let spirits speak through them as well. It's not, you can make them out of paper. You can certainly find pictures of them. They actually go to eBay and put in spirit trumpet. There are people who occasionally sell actually old spirit trumpets as well. But, it's one of the affectations of spiritualism that supposedly lets spirits speak in an audible way. And I don't see how that works at all necessarily. We're down to the wire here. I'm going to hit this last question here from James. Can everyone develop psychic ability, or is it just a gift that people are born with? My question is, can everyone develop an artistic ability, or is that a gift that people are born with? Or a musical talent? So we're all psychic. In fact, we're more psychic as kids than we are as adults because our culture and education system and most of the rest of the world educates it out of us. We're brainwashed not to be psychic, basically. We're told it doesn't exist, that we're imagining things, all of that, and it kind of goes away. And it can come back. There are certainly ways you can re-examine and kind of rediscover your innate psychic abilities. But what it seems like is that everyone has an aptitude, like people have an artistic aptitude for a particular form of ESP or psychokinesis or spirit communication. So some people might be able to move an object, but not necessarily do remote viewing. Other people might be able to do psychometry, to hold an object and pick up information from it, but not do psychokinesis or precognition for that matter. Not all psychics can tell the future. That's kind of a pop culture thing. So it really boils down to the idea that you need to discover your psychic ability, what your psychic aptitudes are, based on previous experiences and some techniques. I teach a class actually for the Rhine Research Center, Rhine Education Center, on kind of developing your intuition, which is really developing ESP. There are some exercises you can definitely do for that. So people can develop them. And people can also discover that they had this innate ability all along and suddenly start getting really good at it without any exercises for that matter. All right. And that is correct, Mariah, Paranormal Concierge. A trumpet is useless in the dark. unless it has something luminous stripes on it or something around the rim so people can see it either floating or something. That's it for tonight. I want to invite everybody to come back in 2 weeks. I'm not sure what the Rhine courses are yet for 2025. They will be starting the first week of February. At the next session, and my next show on the 22nd of December, I had better have the names of those courses from John Kruth, the executive director. We're going to work on the schedule for that. I do think that one of the courses actually is going to be, as long as he's still available, Kenny Biddle, who is a more open-minded skeptic than myself, have been teaching a course every so often called The Skeptical Approach to Parapsychology. So for anybody who's interested in ghost hunting, especially, that's really important. But just generally, from what skepticism actually means and the difference between a skeptic and a pseudo-skeptic, all of that's in there as well. So that, I believe, that will be one of the classes that I'll be teaching, but there'll be others. Probably the field investigation class as well. Not quite sure yet. Anyway, come back on the 22nd. Tell your friends. Do subscribe. Pass this along. Follow me on, I have to add in my new handle because I'm now on Blue Sky. I may at some point drop off of Twitter, off of X, but Blue Sky is developing really fast. And I'm just simply profparanormal.bsky.social. So at profparanormal.bsky.social. I encourage you to jump onto Blue Sky. Everybody's popping over there. Thanks, everybody. Have a great couple of weeks, and as you're preparing for the big holidays.